Matt Bailey was a man who preferred a quiet, secluded life. Working in a small printing house and regular classes in the boxing ring were his routine. Not one of those who believed in fate, he never attached importance to rumors and horror stories. But circumstances began to change when he found a note in his mailbox. There were only 2 words written on it. "Do you remember?" At first Matt thought it was just someone's prank, but then he began to notice other little things that unsettled him. A few days later, he found another note taped to the door of his apartment, which read, "Just remember that night." The inscription turned out to be written in his own handwriting. Matt studied her for a long time, but couldn't remember any particular night he should have remembered. The strangeness continued, and he began to catch himself thinking that someone was watching him, but he turned around, and no one. In the evenings, Matt felt that someone was passing under the windows of his apartment and stopped, as if waiting for the moment when he would open the door. Sometimes the sound of footsteps seemed so real that he opened the front door and peered into the empty hallway, but found nothing. His nights began to turn into an endless struggle with insomnia. He often woke up feeling eyes on him, and then found another note under the door. One night, when he could no longer sleep, the phone rang. There were only short, ragged breaths on the other end of the line, and a strange feeling that this was not a random prank. A couple of weeks later, Matt remembered an episode from his past that he decided to forget. As a teenager, he was involved in an incident. Together with a group of friends, they went to an abandoned warehouse to throw a party. That night ended in tragedy. One of their friends, Tom, accidentally fell down the stairs and was seriously injured. But a group of teenagers agreed not to tell anyone the truth, and, fearing the consequences, Matt then decided to leave the scene, leaving his friend alone. Years later, Matt hardly thought about it, but now he was tormented by the fear that someone might find out the truth. One morning he found a photograph under the door. It showed the same warehouse, and someone, whose face was hidden by a hood, was standing next to the exit. There was another note under the photo. "Do you remember now?" Finally, unable to stand it, Matt decided to return to the warehouse himself and find out who was trying to settle accounts with him. Late in the evening, Matt drove up to an abandoned warehouse. Rubbing his palms with sweat, he got out of the car and looked around. The warehouse looked even more abandoned and frightening than he remembered it as a teenager. Dilapidated walls, broken windows, and sagging doors. All this was like a reminder that this warehouse had forgotten about life, but had not forgotten about the tragedy that happened here many years ago. As he got closer, he noticed that the door was ajar. At first I thought that the wind had opened it, but on closer inspection, I saw that the hinges had been recently oiled. Someone clearly had a reason to keep the entrance accessible. The feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. He stepped over the threshold, and the doors closed noiselessly behind him. It was dark and cold inside, but the light of the lantern he had brought with him picked out the silhouette of the stairs leading to the second floor. It was from her that Tom once fell. Matt's heart sank at the memory, but he forced himself to move forward. There was an empty bottle on the floor, and the traces of dust seemed slightly blurred, as if someone had been here recently. Passing by corridors and side rooms, he caught strange shadows on himself, which disappeared as soon as he looked in their direction. By the time he reached the stairs, the feeling of anxiety had become so strong that his hands were shaking. On one of the steps, he noticed a piece of paper pinned to the wooden surface with a button. Picking up the sheet, he read, "Are you really ready to remember?" This question made him stop. He recalled that night in great detail, but could not understand why someone would bring him back to these events after so many years. Climbing to the second floor, he found himself in a spacious room, in the center of which stood a sagging sofa covered with a thick layer of dust. But something else caught his attention, a neatly folded plaid, as if someone had recently slept here. Looking around the room, he noticed a charcoal drawing on the wall, resembling the outline of a man. The words were printed under the picture, "You left me here." Matt felt a tremor. He didn't know what to think, but he kept walking, looking around the other rooms. "I found an old cassette recorder in one of them, and, as if hypnotized, pressed play. A trembling voice came from the speaker, weak and anxious. It was Tom's voice. "Matt, if you're hearing this, it means you're back. I knew you wouldn't forget. I couldn't leave because of you. You left me here." 1. Do you understand now how I felt then? The voice sounded too real, and Matt felt his legs give way. He remembered that they had all decided not to tell anyone about what had happened and had left the warehouse on that fateful day. However, hearing Tom's voice now, as if he knew that he would return one day, was unbearable. Clenching his fists, Matt decided to check if this could be someone's elaborate prank. He started to leave, but suddenly he heard a rustle behind him. He turned around abruptly, but there was no one in the room. Then he noticed another note pinned to the wall near the exit. "You're not leaving until you remember everything." Now, overcome by a mixture of panic and rage, Matt ran out of the warehouse, getting into the car. After driving a considerable distance, he realized that his phone was not in his pocket. In a panic, he tried to search the car, but the phone was nowhere to be found. Going back to the warehouse seemed like a crazy idea, but without a phone, he couldn't even call for help. He returned to the warehouse in the early morning and went straight to the room where he found the cassette recorder. His phone was on the floor next to the couch. The screen was on. Matt slowly picked it up and noticed that there was a message on the screen. "Look around. This place has always been your nightmare. Now you have become a part of it." He looked around the room once more. Now the walls were covered with an old magazine with inscriptions and comments that looked like his handwriting, but Matt did not remember him writing them. There was a plan of the warehouse painted on one of the walls, and the places where he went were circled in red. In the center of the plan was a circle with the caption, "Here you left your conscience." Matt realized that the warehouse had never been abandoned. He himself could not figure out whether it was a trace of his own actions, left under the influence of old memories, or someone decided to play a dangerous game with him. Matt stood in the dimness of the warehouse, feeling the air around him grow heavier. Fragments of memories flashed through his mind, but their details slipped away, as if he had completely forgotten them. He looked at the plan on the wall again and remembered. There was a room behind one of the aisles where none of them had entered that night. He was sure it was just empty. However, now, with trembling hands, he headed there. The walls of the corridor were peeling, and there were old scratches left by someone a long time ago. Soon he reached the door behind which the room was located. She looked completely ordinary, except for a strange metallic sound, barely audible from behind the wall. Taking a deep breath, Matt slowly turned the knob and entered. The room was spacious, with several wooden boxes and, as he immediately noticed, a table in the far corner. He went to him and saw that there was a notebook on the table, covered with a thick layer of dust. Removing the dust with his hand, he opened it to the first page and found his own scribbles, as if he had written once, but did not remember any of this. The notes were written incoherently, in chunks of text, but each line revealed more and more the secret that he had long buried in himself. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't know it would go this far. Why did they leave me here with this load?" The lines became more illegible, the words distorted, but the meaning began to emerge. It turned out that he and his friends did not just happen to be in the warehouse then. This place was a secret hideout for their small meetings when no one knew where they were. They were playing dangerous games, testing which of them could last longer in total darkness. It was, in their words, a test of courage. Matt remembered that Tom didn't want to be alone at the time. The other guys started laughing at him and left him there, locking him up for a few minutes to test his courage. None of them thought that something serious would happen. But then there was an inscription in the notebook that made Matt's stomach turn cold. "Tom didn't come out. We forgot about him, and the next night everything was different." Matt's hand was shaking when he realized that they had just left without releasing Tom. He didn't remember how he could have forgotten about it, but the words on the pages continued to reveal what he had pushed out of his memory. After many hours of waiting, Tom was left alone, and when he couldn't get out, it led to terrible consequences. Matt suddenly realized that this place was his own prison of memories. The warehouse was not cursed or haunted, as it had previously seemed. It was his fear and guilt that returned to punish him for a forgotten act. Matt was stunned, realizing that his own memory had driven him here over and over again, like a curse imposed by himself. He glanced at the last notes in the notebook, which were becoming more and more hysterical and illegible, as if Tom was desperately trying to leave his last words while the air in the room was gradually running out. Those frantic scribbles now echoed in Matt's head. "Why did you leave me? I was trying to get out. Will anyone hear?" My heart was pounding. He realized that they really had time to return, but none of them dared to do so. They were all afraid of punishment, fear of possible consequences. They chose their own safety, the price of which was Tom's life. With shaking hands, Matt put the notebook back on the table and closed it, feeling that it was getting harder for him to breathe. Each new discovery hit him on the nerves, but he had to face the truth. To cope with this load, he decided to explore all corners of the warehouse, go through each of the gloomy, dusty corridors. Matt wanted to finally figure out what had happened and how they could so easily ignore their friend's life. At the end of one of the corridors, barely illuminated by the rare sunlight filtering through a broken window, he noticed another door that looked stronger than the others. The door was splattered with dark stains, from which there was something terrible. For a moment, he thought he heard a soft whisper, but quickly dismissed the thought, realizing that it was just a game of his own imagination. Opening the door, he found himself in a small room that looked like an improvised prison. There was a terrible smell of mustiness and mold inside, and the claw marks on the concrete walls were barely visible, left by a man desperately trying to get out. There were pieces of cloth and paper in the corners, obviously the same messages Tom had scribbled in desperation. Matt squatted down and began to read what he could make out. The inscriptions were short, chaotic, and some even consisted of 1 or 2 words. "It's cold. Silence. Pain. They forgot. It's been a long time." The realization of what had happened overwhelmed him, leaving him with a deep sense of guilt. Matt realized that he couldn't take all these secrets with him anymore. Matt tore himself away from the scrawled notes on the wall. These words seemed to stop the flow of his thoughts, hitting him in the heart. He got to his feet and walked to one corner of the room, where something glistened under a layer of dust and dirt. Bending down, he saw a metal lighter, the one that Tom always carried with him. Suddenly, a memory flashed before my eyes. Tom laughing, lighting a light and throwing a lighter in the air as his signature greeting. But there is no trace of the former warmth of these memories. Matt shuddered, realizing that in front of him was not just a lighter, but a symbol of abandoned hope and betrayal, which could no longer be erased. He gripped it in his hand, the cold metal burning his skin, as if trying to remind him that what had happened was not just a bad dream. At that moment, a wave of panic swept over him. The realization that he was part of what doomed Tom to a painful death tore at him from the inside. The realization that he was now the only one who could keep this secret, or, conversely, reveal it, was withering. He returned to the door and began to pull the handle furiously. I wanted to break away, get out of here, but my feet seemed rooted to the floor. And suddenly a strange sound caught his attention. Quiet, almost imperceptible, like muffled breathing or a slight rasp. Matt turned around, looking back at the wall where Tom had left his last words. He realized that it wasn't just a claw mark. Tom must have tried to break through the concrete, scratched him until he bled, trying to find salvation even in the very last minutes. There were what looked like splinters of fingernails on the wall next to the scratches, like the remnants of a futile effort. At that moment, he felt a chill go through his body again, as if the very air in this room was saturated with pain and despair. This place, this dungeon, had become a mute monument to a mistake that could no longer be paid for. Matt suddenly realized that he couldn't leave it all here. But what exactly did he want to do? Confess? Should I tell others? He imagined how his friends would take it as a society if they found out that Tom was dying, slowly realizing his loneliness and being abandoned. He noticed another small note in the corner, hidden under a pile of garbage. Picking it up, he read a short message written in a weak hand. "If I die, know that I believed that someone would come back for me." These words made Matt gasp in pain.